In our Vuetify Firebase meetup project here, we already achieved a lot, and over the last videos, we implemented authentication. We're now able to sign users up and in. The one problem we still have there is we don't really communicate the current state of our authentication though. If I click sign up here, well, I get this automatically generated HTML5 error, but we don't get any error besides that. If I sign up with a valid form data, but a password which actually is not long enough, I don't get any feedback at all. So that is not the best way of handling this form. Would be nice to see when something is happening, would be nice to get some authentication errors, for example. Let's implement that in this video. So I want to basically display the current state or information about the current state of authentication to the user. For that, we of course will use Vuex, since this is our state management system. And there I want to track two things. I want to track if we're currently loading data, so if I want to display like a spinner because we're currently sending data to the server and waiting for a response. And I want to display if we got any authentication errors. Now for that, I'll simply go up in my state, and here, besides my loaded meetups and the user, I'll add two other things. I'll add a new field, which is called loading, which I'll set to false initially, because initially we aren't loading. And then I'll also have a field of error, which I'll set to null, because initially I also don't assume to have an auth error. Now, we could of course also just name this error for now and later see if we can reuse that on different components, because we might have different areas in our application where we reach out to a server, and then it might be nice to have a reusable error state we can use. So with these two new state fields here, I need new mutations to change them. For example, I want to have a set loading mutation, where I of course mutate the state and where I get a payload to either set it to loading or to not loading, because we are done, we got everything we want. So here I will simply set state loading equal to payload. So payload should be true or false depending on whether we are loading or not. So that is what I'll set up here. And then I also want to have a set error commit mutation. That is what it's called. Here I also receive a payload, and that of course will be my error. So I will set state error equal to payload. That would be a fitting mutation. We could also add a clear error mutation, and of course we could also just pass a payload of null here to clear the error, but I think it is a bit more explicit about what we do here if we have a mutation really focusing on this sole purpose, where I set state error equal to null. So with that, we got new mutations to work with loading and error states. Now we can use them. For example, when signing a user up, right at the start, of course want to set loading to true, because no matter if it succeeds or not, we are loading, we are reaching out to the web. So here in this action, I definitely want to commit set loading, and I want to set this to true because I am loading. On the other hand, whenever we reach the then block here where we got a user, we certainly are not loading anymore. So here we can again commit set loading, but here set it to false. And of course I also want to set loading to false if we get an error, because even though we got an error, the loading process is finished. There's no more data to come. On the other hand, if we do get an error, there's one other thing I want to commit. I want to set error to error, and this specific error here thrown by Firebase happens to have a message property. We could see that in one of the earlier videos, and you can confirm that if you simply run authentication, open the console, the JavaScript console, because we are logging the error here, and then have a look at the error. So there we have a message property. The following one here, let me show this to you. If we enter valid data but a password which is not long enough and I click sign up, here we got a message object. As you can see, password should at least be 6 characters. So this is the property we can access there, and that's the one we'll then use. So that's something we have to rely on. So with that, I'm also saving the error. On the other hand, right at the start, when we start loading, we probably want to also run clear error. So this mutation here, because if we're sending a new request, we want to clear any previous errors probably. So that looks like a decent setup here. Of course, I'll repeat it for the sign-in process. I'll also commit loading and clear errors here at the beginning. I'll set loading to false once we have, well, either a success or an error case, but I will also set the error here like that. With that, we're managing all that in Vuex. We're managing our state here. Now we have to take advantage of the state in our views. For example, to show a spinner whilst we are loading, or to show an error if we got one. Let's start with the error. And for that, let's go back to Vuetify.js. And here, under components, this alert component looks all right. We can add such an alert at the top of our page to show it whenever we got an error. Actually, I want to have a closable alert though, so that we can dismiss it as a user. And we can simply have a look at the code here. As always, we see valert is the component. Dismissible has to be added so that we get this X symbol to close it. And then we bind it either to vmodel to open close it triggered by a property, or since vmodel is just a wrapper for an input event which is emitted and a value property you can pass in, we might also just listen to the input event to clear our errors. But I'll come back to that. So let me copy that code here, and I want to add it in my signup.vue file here at the very top. I want to do the same in my sign-in file. So why don't we create a utility component for that, stored in a new directory maybe. I'll name it shared because it will hold some shared components. And here I'll name it alert.vue as the file name. And here I'll add a template like that and insert it like that. So now we got the alert here. Now with that, I want to set this from info to, let's have a look, maybe, the error alert. So that has the error property then on it. So set it to error, dismissible. And I don't want to use vmodel. Instead, I want to just listen to the event and bind it through a different source. So here, I'll add a script. And on this script here, or in this script, I'll now export my default object as always. And here I'll simply add a method on close, where I will emit a new event with this $emit using this built-in event emitter Vue.js offers. And I will name it dismissed. You can choose any name you want here. And that's actually all. I won't pass any data with that. Now here, I don't use vmodel therefore, but I just bind to add input. And here I then execute on close like that. Now let's see if that works like that. If I go to the signup.vue file here, I'll add a new vlayout row at the very top, where I will hold this alert later on with a vflex element, XS12, and on smaller screens it should also be a bit smaller. And in there, I now want to include that alert component. I will make it a global component. So in the main.js file, I'll first of all import it. So I'll import the alert component from /components shared, and then the alert.vue file like that. And with that being imported, I can now register it here with Vue component, and then I'll name it app alert, the alert component like that. So that's the component registered. We can now use that selector here in the signup.vue file to import it like this. And here I now want to listen to the dismissed event. That's the custom event we're emitting here. Like this happens or this is emitted if we actually dismiss the alert. So here I want to listen to that and I want to execute on dismissed a method which I of course have to implement here. And yes, you could do that differently. I'm just using this setup because theoretically with that, you could use that alert component here to not just display errors, but anything which can be dismissed. And if I were to handle on close in here, in the alert component, and reach out to Vuex to clear errors, then this alert would be bound to only handle errors because it manipulates the state. Instead, this is a dump component. It doesn't know what I use it for. And yes, we will have to adjust the text view output here. But with that, this also means we can use it by simply adding or emitting this dismissed event. And then we handle on dismissed in the component where we know what we actually want to display. So here, I'll add a new method on dismissed. And for now, I will simply log it to see if that works. Dismissed alert. Now, right now, if we go to the sign up page again, and we reload this, we should always see the alert. We don't. I'm including the alert here. Well, yes, makes sense. By default, it's not showing. So here we have to subbind the value property either to true or false. So bind it with a colon in front of it to bind it to a dynamic value. And it should always be true here though, because I always want to show it. Now we see the error here. Now, if I click on that, we see dismissed alert whenever I click it. So that's working. With that, we got the logic we need to now also control when we show it. And I won't trigger that here through value, even though I could do that, but I can simply decide if I want to attach this whole row here with the if. And there I now need to track if we have an error or not. So for that, let's go back to the store and add a getter. And here I'll name this error. I'll of course access the state here and I will return state error, just like that. Whilst I'm already here, I can also return loading here because that's the other new state we added and I'll need this too. Return state loading, like that. So now I'm returning the error. Back in the signup.vue file, I can now add a new computed property, which I'll also name error, because here I will return this store getters error. So the error we just added. With that error property here, this is now what I want to bind here. If that is null, it will not be displayed. If it's anything but null, we will see the error. Now in onDismissed, I therefore here want to dispatch a new action. This store dispatch clear error, of course, because I want to get rid of the error. If I get rid of the error getter will return null again, and that will then trigger if to remove this row and therefore the alert, and it will reappear if we get a new error. Now, of course, I want to pass the error text into that alert component. So I will bind with :text to a text property and pass error.message. Keep in mind, error has to be an object which has a message. That's just something I define in my application. It's either null, in which case this doesn't get executed because the whole row isn't attached, or it is an object, and in this case, it needs to have a message property. Now, of course, the problem is that app alert doesn't know a text property we could bind to. So we have to go to alert and add it via the props property. Here I want to bind to a text property, which I then output here inside of my alert like this. With this setup, let's save this and let's see if it works. Let's open the console, enter something here like an invalid password, and let's click sign up. And we do get the error here. Password should be at least 6 characters. If I close this, then we got an error. Unknown action type, clear error. Let's see, did I mistype that? The action is named. The action doesn't exist. We only have the mutation, right? So I obviously need to add it as an action too. Clear error, because I'm dispatching it as an action and I want to do that. So here I'll extract commit again, and here I will then commit clear error like that. I didn't have to do that for set error because right now I'm only committing set error here as part of other actions, which is fine. So now we have a clear error action. Let's try it again. Let's maybe try a valid password, but an email address, which is already taken. And we see the email address is already in use by another account. So it's really nice that Firebase gives us these nicely formatted error messages. Now closing also works. If I submit again, I get it again. So that's nice. As a last piece in this video, I want to disable the button and show a spinner inside the button whilst we are waiting for the response. And the cool thing is, Vuetify actually makes that simple. If you check out the button configuration here and you scroll down a little bit, you will see that you have loaders, which are buttons you can click to, for example, see a spinner here. Here, that icon loader here looks pretty good. So let's inspect that code. And you see that icon loader here uses this span with a loader icon inside of it, and then also simply gets disabled when it is loading and binds to a loading property when it is loading. So that is what I need to implement. I'll do that in the signup.vue file here in my button where I have sign up right now. I'll add something after sign up. This span I copied here. So this span which will actually display the spinning circle whenever it is loading. So like that. I also now, of course, need to bind to disabled and to loading when it is loading. And for that, I will bind to a loading property. So loading will be bound to loading. And loading here is just a property made available by the vButton element, whilst loading here is a property I have to define. And I will define it as a computed property because where will I get loading? Where will I get this information if it's loading from? From my Vuex state, right? Because here we have that state, or here's the mutation. Here's the loading state, and we set it to loading or to not loading in our actions, depending on whether we're just starting or finishing. So I can use that information extracted here from the getter we also defined. This store gathers loading. That's now referring to that getter we defined down here to get that loading state. And with that, we got everything we need. Now let's try that out. Let's go back to the application here. Let's reload it maybe. And let's try this again. Let's submit a valid value here. Click sign up. Yeah, we saw it, but let's try an invalid one again. It's not spinning. Whoops, let me quickly enter some invalid values. It's not spinning. The reason for this is that we didn't copy all the code. Here, just loading the HTML code isn't enough. Notice the custom loader class. That isn't provided by Vuetify by default. Instead, you see the style tab here. Here is the CSS code. You rarely have to do that, but some component examples here use CSS code. So always check all the tabs here if something isn't working. So in this case, I'll just copy the style here. And I could copy it into my signup.vue file, but I actually want to use the same logic in different places. So I'll instead use my main.stylus file where I change the theme. And here you can actually just copy in normal CSS code. You don't have to use stylus syntax. That will work. So now I'm defining the custom loader class globally. And with that, if we now let it compile, we try this again. Now you see it spins. Firebase is just so super quick that you don't really see it. But if you watch closely, it does spin before we get the error. So that's nice. Let's now do the same for the sign in page. That should of course be simple. We got the logic in the sign up page. I'll first of all copy the whole button here, go over to sign in and replace the button here. Just make sure to rename it to sign in. And what else did we change? Well, we added that alert at the top. So let's add vLayout, that row with the alert at the top of that form too. So right after the initial container. The missing thing now is that we need to get the computed properties, so loading and error, and that we'll need to add the onDismissed method. So I'll do that in signin.vue. Here I'll first of all add my 2 computed properties, and I'll also copy the onDismissed method from the signup.vue file and add it here in the signin.vue file. And I can get rid of the console log with the dismissed error, I guess. So let's save this and let's try it out. That should be all. And that shows how reusable that alert component already is. Here on the sign-in page, if we reload this and we try to sign in with something which doesn't exist, like test4, didn't create that. There is no user, that's great. And if we use a valid email address but a wrong password, well, either the user is invalid or the password. So we get an error message here too, and we can dismiss it. Now let's try a valid login data attempt here. That's still working. So with that, we enhance the auth process. We're using the state. Now we're giving a better feedback to the user, which is super important in any application because you obviously want to allow the user to know where he is and what's happening. I hope this was helpful. Can't wait to see you in the other videos. Bye.